is always my pleasure, but in this instance, it is my great pleasure to be able to talk with Ken Levine of Irrational. Thank you so much for your time.
It's always good to see you, Adam.
So,
and congratulations on this new venture of yours.
Thank you so much.
I'm excited to be part of it.
Yes, yes. You're among the very first, and probably this is the nicest background we've gotten to use yet. The fireplace chat.
That's sexy.
Okay, so I just played a very generous chunk of the game starting from the beginning, and there's so many fascinating things that really came to mind. But the first was there's something very familiar about it, and there's something very, very fresh about BioShock Infinite. And I think that kind of brings in the idea of how do you see this kind of relate to obviously your previous work, BioShock. It's by no means a sequel, but what did you feel you wanted to inherit that justified the name BioShock to still be on it?
Well, there's sort of two things. There were two main principles that we knew we had to keep, and everything else was up for grabs. And there's a third principle which was sort of philosophical. So let me start with the beginning, which is, one is an amazingly detailed, dense, exciting, bizarre, but also believable feeling environment to explore is something that we knew we had to have for to be a BioShock game. And the second thing was having the sort of improvisational nature of combat and having all these tools and all these choices about how you take on the combat challenges. But then there was a third thing which is really hard to define, and I think it's only the reason I think only Irrational could have made this particular game. It's I know it's BioShock when I see it, and I know it's not when I know it's not. And sometimes we would do things and we would look at it and we go, you know what? That's not a part of a BioShock game. And even though it was, so I never thought BioShock, well, I can't say I never thought because I never really thought about it in depth, but when we started this game, we knew it had to be a BioShock game. And people at the beginning was like, oh, you're just calling it BioShock. And I'm like, no, it really, trust me, it's going to be a BioShock game. It feels, I think it genuinely feels that way. But it is just a lot of judgment calls along the way as well. That just says, is this BioShock or is this not BioShock? And quite often, sometimes we would just cut stuff because it wasn't BioShock.
So you gave a presentation right before we started to play, and you said, this is, there's environment here, but but it's really about story. And then you start this game with this absolutely stunning, just sort of walking through this wild place that is Colombia, and the setting of it is just absolutely amazing. I'm curious sort of what was kind of the key themes. Obviously, it is period.
Yeah.
But there is a very particular tone, both of sort of I think hope and utopian, and a very dark element when you really start to pay attention.
Well, I remember we were struggling with it back at the beginning, and I went for a run one day, and it was super sunny out. It was June or something, and it was one of those brilliantly blue, sunny, perfect days. And I remember looking at the sun, the color of the light, and looking at the mailbox, the reflection of light on this black mailbox and how it looked, and thinking it's just one of those perfect moments. And I wish I could just put this in a bottle. And I'm like, oh my God, that's what Colombia is. It is this sky color. It is this world. It is the memory of America that people think existed that never really actually quite existed. And when you first go out of that garden area and you see the real street of Colombia the first time, and the skylines going by, and the Zeppelin, and the building coming in for docking, that is both familiar, like it looks like the Music Man. If you look then you see the people on the street, just like these people enjoying a lemonade or whatever, and guys selling hot dogs and a newsboy. But then it's against this ridiculous, over-the-top setting. And it's both those things. And what we were trying to capture is that feeling of wonder that people must have had at that time, of all this hope and optimism for the future. And to a modern audience, if we just had a street scene from back then, we wouldn't have that effect. But with these buildings coming in and landing, and the cargo going by in the skylines, it just was, to me, if that we either got you in that moment or we didn't have you at all. Either we're going to get you or we're never going to have you after that moment, I think, of this buying into this city.
It's interesting how Colombia was once actually part of America and then decided to, separate itself from America. Yeah. All this at the same time, it still is identifying itself as American, and more American than America actually is.
Yeah. They were frustrated with what they saw as the weakness of the rest of America's commitment to the mission, and so they said, they separated themselves because they thought that they were the true Americans, and that's not. I mean, that's not new under the sun.
No,
You know,
no.
you've seen that happen, you know, multiple times in you know, across the course of history. You rarely have a country that separates itself from you know, in a revolution of some kind and says, oh, we want to be something totally different, because people don't change. They want to be what they are, but they view themselves as the genuine version of that.
With that in mind, I guess there are certain elements in this game, still that kind of Ayn Randish value system and some of the anxieties about, you know, the changing of America that do have some applicable qualities to discussions that are happening right now in society. Was that something you were cognizant of, or did it kind of just happen?
No, I think it happens because, in the same way, you know, when we did BioShock, we didn't, you know, realize that, you know, the candidate for vice president of the United States would be, you know, an objectivist. You know, but it's not because we have a vision of the future. It's because these themes tend to repeat in history. You know, themes of nationalism, themes of nativism, and we always feel that when we deliver these themes in these games, and the reason it's so confrontational when you first encounter, like, you know, especially the racial themes, the racial bias themes, we don't want it to be a coloring of the game. It has to be central. It has to be, you have to be confronted with it in the same way that it has to be very real to you, or it's not, you know, if you're just an observer, I think it loses something in terms of your understanding of it and your understanding of the sort of the emotional context of that kind of experience. And it's not meant to be pleasant, you know, and most games are, you know, generally meant to be pleasant entirely. Yeah. And there are some things in this game I think will be very difficult for some people. In the same way I think in BioShock 1 there were things that were difficult for some people. But I think it's also games, why should games be any different in terms of...
I couldn't agree more, but I think this is going to make BioShock Infinite stand out all the more because you really don't see these matters addressed in any way. Yeah. And that otherness tends to be very binary and very kind of simple. It's aliens or... you know, those guys who live over there. Is this something that sort of philosophically you really want to approach in games and try to go down these paths? So a lot of other people would rather just stay away from.
You know, I don't like sort of wake up in the morning and say I want to do something confrontational. I go after what I'm interested in, and I'm interested in this period, and I'm interested in, you know, I'm interested in sort of putting, I think the thing deep down I'm most interested in putting myself in somebody else's head. And that's why I'm interested in writing characters like Comstock and characters like Ryan, because they're not like me in a lot of ways. You know, they're very authoritarian figures, and they think they understand the world in a very particular way, and they think they have the answers. And I'm sort of the opposite. I'm like, I don't know what the hell is going on.
That's why you have a staff.
That's right. You guys figure it out. You know, and so they're very different. Obviously, one is a capitalist atheist, and the other one is a nationalist, you know, religious zealot. But they're also very similar in a lot of ways because they're both believe that there is one way forward, and this is the way. And you know, so what I like about the experience, and it was much harder for me with Comstock than it was with me than Ryan, was understanding why people would follow them, because I'm not a religious person. No,
and actually that was one of the things that was really standing out to me is how did all these people I'm going to go to the floating city that the man with the white beard is sort of guiding.
You know, and that's sort of, you discover as time goes on what part of the message is so appealing, because I had to figure that out, or I couldn't write the character. And I actually spent a lot of time we have some very intensely religious people in the studio actually, and I had some really interesting conversations with a bunch of them, and because I was struggling for a while, I really was struggling to understand, and I would say, you know, what is it for you? And you know, sometimes it's something that I have trouble connecting to, you know, in terms of there's just a belief, you know, but then there's other elements of you know, whether it's objectivism or religion, where I can see I need to understand what that is, and then I can go there with those characters. And when I figured that out with Comstock, like, all of a sudden, so many pieces fell into place in the game.
So obviously, there is more characterization in BioShock Infinite. You know, characters are actually talking, whereas, you know, the original BioShock was kind of a more solitary experience. People, you know, were coming in over I can't remember what the device was called, but it was
something.
Anyhow, so that I think is one of the most distinct things that really distinguishes it from the original BioShock. Was it challenging to try to do something that is a traditional shooter and then have all of this kind of acting happening around you?
Yeah, like when we decide, look, there's a reason in System Shock 2 and BioShock, everybody's dead except for the enemies. And there's a reason every time you encounter a human, he's behind some piece of glass. There's a reason you don't talk. There's a reason there's nobody with you walking around the world with you. And the reason is because those things are really hard to do. Like to have the level of narrative we have and the fidelity of narrative and not have to go to cutscenes all the time. You know, because this is a game that has as rich a story, if not richer than almost anything out there in terms of the amount of texture to it and depth to it. But we don't break out and have these sort of safe little cutscenes where we can cordon the game off from it. We're like, what if the player starts shooting? What if Elizabeth does this? What if this happens? What if that guy does that? Well, what if the player does this and everything's ruined? Like, well, then I guess the player won't see that content. You know, that's.
I mean, and I think that's something worth pointing out, and I definitely experienced that in the game, is that, yes, there's times I think where Elizabeth is going to be saying things to you, but depending on where you go, she seems to have dynamic reactions to the environment around her, or like the sense of threat that might be somewhere ahead.
Yep, you know, there's a whole, Elizabeth it's bizarre because she's both, I think to a lot of us, we all kind of fell in love with her a little, or a lot. And and also I remember watching the game a few weeks ago and forgetting that we had all these incredibly talented people. You know, there's a motion capture actress who portrays Elizabeth. There's a voice actress, Courtney Draper, who portrays Elizabeth. And there's also the animators and the artists. And I kind of forgot because I had spent so much time with her. Not because like, oh my God, you look at her and she's 100% real. But I kind of forgot that she doesn't actually exist, you know? I realized that, oh, that's Courtney's voice. That's my words in Courtney's voice. That's not Elizabeth saying things. Because, and I think, and the whole Liz, we have a squad called Liz Squad, which is, you know, it's a multidisciplinary group of people whose job it is to make sure Liz, you know, rocks. And a lot of their job is being her and figuring out how she'd react to things in the world. And seeding the world with her reactions because, you know, she has a whole range of things where we either sort of give her a reaction or certain objects can potentially elicit certain reaction. You know, I'm sure you've seen her like look at things or sit on things or read things or play with things. You know, I know she saw her like play with the arcade machines and stuff. You know, she can interact with a lot of things, and you can miss a lot of it. That's just part of the experience. You know, we accept that. The most important thing is that you turn and look at her. She's present in the world and not this. Like most other NPCs. You know, the bar is, the industry hasn't worked that hard on setting on the companion character aspect. In fact, I don't think there hasn't been a great evolution of it since Alex. I don't think a really great companion evolution, and part of it is because I think that, you know, a lot of the companion AIs get put in the world to do basically what the player does, which is shoot. And like, I don't want an AI with me who does what I do. And again, I'm never one who says this is the only way to make a game.
Right. Talking about, this is how
how I look at it. Elizabeth does and Booker/you have entirely different skill sets, and you know, I wanted her to be present in the world and the exploration and the combat and all those things in the narrative, but I wanted her to be a completely different entity from you. So like a lot of times people are like, oh, let's give her a gun. I'm like, why? Because then she's just stealing your kills, and she's no different than you are. And it also is not Elizabeth. She's not a combat unit. She's a person. Well, we want her to be a person.
Well, and then that's really supposed to be your motivation to carry through the game. You really need to care about this character if you're really going to stay invested.
Yeah, if you don't connect to Elizabeth, I think it's going to be, you know, I guess you don't have to. And like in some way, like I think there's a lot of people who played BioShock 1 who didn't care about a Rapture, or they just like shooting the stuff and the cool special effects and stuff. And there are even people maybe who play this game who don't care about Elizabeth. I think, you know, it is, to me, it's, you know, she became the heart of the game for us, and we knew that, and we had to invest the sort of love into her that she deserved.
I mean, just the animations alone showed that there was a lot of care and affection that's put in that character.
They did amazing.
Now, yes, it is an action game. Think about everything we've just talked about, from religion to racism and the McKinley administration.
And we haven't got to the shooting yet.
We haven't gotten to the shooting part.
Okay.